Let's begin. Thank you all for joining us.
All right. Yes, thank you, everybody. Good evening. I'm Rachel Brandt-Greenfeld. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Holocaust Council Committee of the Jewish Federation of Metro West. It's well known that on January 27th, 1945, the Russian army liberated Auschwitz. At the time, the world, while certainly having some ideas of the hatred that was emanating throughout Nazi Germany and its occupied areas, was truly introduced to the unfathomable terrors of the Holocaust. The world has spent the decades since that day learning and hearing about the endless atrocities of the Nazis. In the years after the Holocaust, the newly formed United Nations put the term genocide into place and then set forth in establishing what defines genocide and how we commemorate the date of the liberation of Auschwitz, which is now International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Being the co-chair of the Holocaust Council Committee has allowed me to see firsthand how we in Greater Metro West are playing an important role in the education and remembrance of the Holocaust. I'm so happy that you've all joined tonight in commemoration of the 78th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, to hear from Lisa Barr, the author of the best-selling and riveting novel, Woman on Fire. As we join and listen in, we keep in mind the importance of this date on the international stage as a way for us to always recognize the significance of this meaningful day. I am pleased now to introduce Greater Metro West's Director of Holocaust Education, Elise Shane Brown, to moderate the conversation.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone for being here to commemorate this day and join in our author insight and hear from author Lisa Barr. Lisa Barr is the New York Times bestselling author of Women on Fire, The Unbreakables, and the historical thriller Fugitive Colors, a suspenseful tale of stolen art, love, lust, and redemption, deception, and revenge on the eve of World War II. We are thrilled to have her join us as she has a great knowledge base on research and having researched all of these books, also as a reporter and an editor for the Jerusalem Post. We are thrilled that she could join us this evening to share some insight on her work. We will also have a Q&A after, so please put them in the chat. In addition, there is closed caption available if you need it. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are so honored to have you here with us. I read the book and truly adored it. It was fantastic. And as I told you in our pre-meeting, as a historian, I don't take reading historical fiction lightly, and you did a fantastic job with it. So I commend you for really going the distance and really making it work in a historical way. So I'm so impressed. We're thrilled to have you and listen to you, and then we will share in the Q&A afterwards. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. What an honor to be here tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you for that gorgeous intro. And just a special shout out, Jamie, you did such an amazing job organizing everything. You're so on top of everything. And it really is wonderful to be here with everyone. I'm going to slip on my glasses. I'm Lisa Barr, as you know, author, journalist, mom of 3 daughters, and I'm also the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. Tonight's book event, as mentioned, is to commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27th, a day which always makes me stop in my tracks. It is my moment to reflect on my family history, and especially the woman who influenced my life in the deepest way, my personal heroine, my grandma Rachel. She was my best friend, a fighter, a Holocaust survivor with dancing brown eyes who had seen the worst atrocities of mankind, having lost both parents and all of her siblings in Auschwitz. But she still believed in love, believed in goodness, cooked with a stirring spoon that I swear was a magic wand, and laughed with her whole body. Nothing could get in the way of the sheer joy she felt about her family and her legacy. She taught me that. My grandma will always be the voice in my head, and her spirit forever guides my hands, the stories I choose to write, and especially her words. Always stand up. especially relevant right now in a time of surging anti-Semitism. So it is with her spirit in mind that I'm here to discuss my journey as a Jewish author. I'm a Chicago girl. I attended Solomon Schechter Day School growing up, which instilled a deep love of Judaism, Israel, and gave me the creative goods at a young age. My teachers nurtured my love of writing and encouraged me to always ask questions and go deeper. I graduated from the University of Illinois and got my master's at the Medill School of Journalism, Northwestern University. Chicago journalism was my boot camp. I began my career right out of college at Margie Korshak Associates Public Relations, which was a big arts and entertainment agency in Chicago. I started there as an intern, and when they hired me, my first client was a place that probably none of you had ever heard of, called Starbucks. So yes, about 100 years ago, I took then CEO Howard Schultz around to all the radio stations to introduce this new coffee experience. I then worked for political news commentator Joel Wiseman as his researcher for 2 years at WGN TV in Chicago. Joel really taught me how to never take no for an answer. The mayor's in a meeting, don't care. Just get me the damn quote. Do what you have to do, but get it. Joel was for sure one of the inspirations for my crusty journalist, Dan Mansfield in Woman on Fire. I then went on to become the managing editor of Today's Chicago Woman for a couple years, and I had my own column interviewing Chicago legends like advice columnist Ann Landers. Remember Ann? Well, we actually did the interview, if you can imagine, in her giant closet, but that's another story. Then at age 28, I decided I needed real change. I had just gotten out of a long relationship and everyone was driving me crazy. Why wasn't I married? You're on a ticking clock. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'm out of here. I want adventure. So I moved to Jerusalem with just my bike, 2 bags, and a computer. I became a reporter and an editor of a weekend section for the Jerusalem Post for 5 years, and it was hands down the best job of my life. I covered everything from interviewing presidents and prime ministers and celebrities like Madonna, Robert De Niro, and Sting. And I covered terrorism, which was not an easy gig. In the early 90s, there was a slew of bus bombings in Jerusalem. And one of the hardest assignments was covering the hospital waiting rooms. And that's what I had to do. So I had to interview members of the community waiting to hear if their loved ones were dead or alive and having to shove a microphone under their noses at this fragile time. It was really hard and devastating. And many nights I would cry myself to sleep. One particular story was the game changer for me. I was on my way home from Jerusalem to Chicago for a family event, and I stopped in Washington, D.C. to see my best friend. And then while I was there, I got the call. Can you be at the White House tomorrow morning? It's top secret. And I'm like, hell yeah. And there I was, one of 3 reporters from the Jerusalem Post, covering the famous handshake between President Bill Clinton, the late Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, and PLO leader Yasser Arafat. It was, as you can imagine, exhilarating covering that piece of history. And then we all know what happened. The peace process went south and Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. I remember this horrific moment like it was yesterday. I was back in Israel at the time, and Leah Rabin, his wife, known as the Jackie O of Israel, became the lioness, taking care of a country whose dreams of peace had been shattered, caring for an entire nation while she herself was in mourning, having had to bury her murdered husband, an Israeli hero of 47 years. Well, Leah Rabin granted me the exclusive interview for Vogue magazine just about a week and a half after the assassination. She invited me into her home in Tel Aviv. I remember going up the elevator of that apartment building, and I have never been so terrified in my life for an interview. Everything was so raw, so incredibly sad at that time. My heart was racing when Leah entered the room, hand outstretched graciously, We sat across from each other, coffee in hand, with just enough emotional distance. Leah Rabin was nobody's victim. During the interview, I asked her one particular question. Mrs. Rabin, I said, is he proud of you, the way you have stepped inside his shoes, mothering an entire nation when you yourself are in such deep pain? She looked at me, this stoic woman, carrying the weight of the country on her shoulders, and she began to cry. She cried, I cried, and we held each other. There was no journalist-subject separation, and we stayed after that interview as friends until her passing. This story, for me, remains to this day one of my most meaningful pieces. From Jerusalem, I moved to Washington, D.C., and I went on to become the managing editor of Moment magazine, which was founded by Nobel Peace Prize winner Elie Wiesel. And then a few years later, I moved back to Chicago and served as an editor and reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times, where I launched the paper's first women's section called Lifestyles. And my first interview was with my personal literary crush, Erica Jong, on the 30th anniversary of the groundbreaking Fear of Flying, which I read at 9 years old, of course, stolen from my parents' top shelf, where all the good stuff was placed. Why am I telling you all this, giving you a play-by-play of my background? Because my 24-year-old savvy young journalist from Chicago, Jules Roth, the main character in my novel, Woman on Fire, has a lot of the younger me in her, the me of years ago, before I became old and seasoned and jaded, before life got in the way of idealism, before kids got in the way of fearlessness, before I knew better than to take on risky assignments. Now I just write about them from my cushy little corner in suburbia. I even gave Jules Roth one of my own backstories. When I was 17 years old, I was on an internship program in Springfield, Illinois, which is our state capital, for a semester during high school. I was approached there by a special law enforcement unit, and they asked if I would be willing to be used as bait to lure and help break a sex trafficking ring. Hello, of course I said yes. And in those days, there were no phones, there were no computers. Everything was in real time. And in those days, you didn't need a parent to sign off on anything. So I was used as bait and people were arrested, and we broke a sex trafficking ring. In that pivotal moment as a teenager, I knew I was going to have a career as a journalist, determined to expose the tough stories and reveal the truth. I wrote Woman on Fire during COVID lockdown. I worked 10 hours a day, 7 days a week for 9 months straight. My goal was to write a book that had everything in it that I love to read myself. So Woman on Fire is a bit of a mutt. It's history, art, passion, risky journalistic pursuits, and of course, strong, fiery women. Woman on Fire is a gripping tale of a savvy young journalist who gets embroiled in a major international art scandal centered around a Nazi-looted masterpiece. Like all three of my novels, this book asks the question, how far would you go for your passion? Would you kill for it, steal for it, or, like Jules Roth, fight for it, even if the price tag is your own life or those you love? Throughout my career, I was a full-time working journalist by day, and at night, I worked on my fiction. Now, happily, this equation is reversed. I always say the story that keeps you up at night is the one you have to write, must go after, no matter what. It is the story that makes you stop in your tracks. My obsession with stolen art, Nazi-looted art, began years ago. Flashback to June 1991. Now, this is before Monuments Men, before the movie and the book Woman in Gold. I was a young journalist just out of graduate school, assigned by my editor to cover an exhibit at the Art Institute of Chicago, and it was called Degenerate Art, The Fate of the Avant-Garde in Nazi Germany. When I walked into the museum, my breath caught in my throat and chills literally covered my arms after viewing more than 150 paintings that the Nazis deemed degenerate, deplorable, illegal. And I knew I was not just reporting any story. I had found my story, the one that would forever change the course of my career and cleave to my soul. I began to deep dive into the world of Nazi looted art, reading and researching anything I could get my hands on. So I'm a writer, not an artist, but I needed to understand what made someone both a murderous madman and an artist. Yes, Hitler, before he became Hitler, was a painter. He had been rejected twice from the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. He had resorted to selling painted postcards on the street and later house painting. His dream of living as an artist was never realized. I truly believe that these early rejections set the stage for what would come later. Hitler's first mission in power, beginning in 1933, was to destroy those artists, architects, entertainers, writers, philosophers, and teachers who did not comply with the Aryan ideal of what is art. The Nazis were determined to eradicate the avant-garde, particularly the Expressionists, a homegrown German movement of art, the free thinkers. Between 1933 and 1945, the Third Reich confiscated, destroyed, and plundered upwards of 600,000 works of art from private collections, museums, galleries, schools, and studios. It was a cultural rape and robbery on the grandest scale that began in Germany and spread like wildfire throughout Europe. Now, I want you to picture this. This is how it looked. Supply stores were shut down, galleries were boarded up, paintings were burned, museums were closed, teachers and curators were stripped of their jobs, artists were subject to public ridicule and banned from exhibiting or selling their works. They were even forbidden from creating art inside the privacy of their own homes. Many artists were forced to hide or flee. Numerous artists committed suicide, and countless others were imprisoned and murdered. This background was the catalyst for my award-winning debut historical novel, Fugitive Colors, a suspenseful tale of stolen art, love, deception, and revenge on the eve of World War II. I wrote the first real draft of that book was when I was on bed rest for 9 months in Jerusalem with my eldest daughter. Yes, 9 full months writing from my bed, so you can only imagine. Both Fugitive Colors and Woman on Fire signify the incredible impact art had on Hitler's war. And now, more than 80 years later, after most of the Holocaust survivors and Nazis have passed, this subject is still front page news. While Fugitive Colors is about the fate of the artists in Nazi Germany, Woman on Fire is about the fate of the art itself, particularly one painting, a painting called Woman on Fire by the fictitious leading expressionist artist Ernst Engel, who was murdered by the Nazis in my first book, Fugitive Colors, and his last known painting is Woman on Fire. This is what's called in my business inserting an Easter egg into your novel. While many works of art were destroyed, those paintings, like Woman on Fire, deemed valuable by the Nazi regime, were held hostage. The Nazis took what they considered the most lucrative and sought after works for themselves and sold major art anonymously by creating fake histories. And with the help of Switzerland, they held secretive auctions for these major works of art. And let me tell you, art dealers and curators from our most revered museums flocked from all over the world to buy these paintings under the guise of anonymity. The Nazis, in turn, funneled the immense profits of so-called degenerate art from these auctions into the Nazi war machine. Art was currency, art was control. But that wasn't enough. The Nazis were determined to create a facade of legitimacy by fabricating an impeccable paper trail to show that many of these stolen works were sold to the Reich willingly. And this is what I call the big lie. For example, in Nazi Germany, if families were forced into concentration camps, their personal records were destroyed and replaced with fake documents and forced bills of sale. Or there were actual sales to corrupt art dealers taking advantage and profiting immensely off of persecuted Jews, buying paintings at a pittance of what the art was actually worth. Again, paper trail. Fleeing Jewish art collectors took whatever they could get, even if it was next to nothing. It was wheeling and dealing at its ugliest. Ironically, the Nazis' obsession with this so-called legitimate paper trail is now being used against them in court as evidence of criminal behavior by families desperately trying to reclaim their stolen artwork. And here it is in the newspapers this week, case in point. I actually just wrote about it today. A major story in the world of Nazi looted art broke this week. Heirs of a Jewish couple from Germany, Karl and Rosie Adler, who fled the Nazis in 1938, are now suing the Guggenheim Foundation and demanding their Picasso back, and it's worth $200 million. The museum, which was gifted the controversial painting in 1976 by a crooked art dealer, refuses to surrender the masterpiece. The painting from 1904 is from Picasso's blue period called Woman Ironing. So this is big breaking news. So stay tuned. The decision handed down by the Manhattan Supreme Court will set an important precedent in the world of stolen art for those who are fighting to get their ancestors' paintings back. And yes, believe it or not, it's the great-grandchildren who are suing the Guggenheim. That's where things are at right now, 80 years after the war. I'm very interested in seeing how this will all play out. And I'm not sure if you know this, but also recently, a major initiative in New York took place, and all museums are now mandated to disclose any artwork looted by the Nazis with an actual plaque next to the painting. This was signed into law as part of a bigger Holocaust initiative. So go New York on that one. There's some positive news in the stolen artwork. There have been strides, paintings returned in France, the Netherlands, and even in New York. And several months ago, in a major case, the Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, ruled in favor of a family who had been fighting for 20 years to have their Pissarro returned, a masterpiece that was literally on their grandparents' mantelpiece. This was a pivotal case in the world of stolen art. But what about the hundreds of thousands of stolen paintings worldwide that are still hidden in our revered museums and in private collections? This is the background for Woman on Fire, inspired by the Cornelius Gurlitt art scandal, known as the Munich art hoard, which was exposed in 2013. This sent shockwaves throughout the world. More than 1,500 major works of art worth approximately $1.5 billion was discovered hidden for nearly 50 years in the rundown Munich apartment of one Cornelius Gurlitt, who passed away in 2014 amid the scandal. His father was none other than Hildebrand Gurlitt, one of Hitler's 4 authorized dealers of Nazi looted art. When Hildebrand died in a car crash in the 70s, he bequeathed his massive treasure trove to his reclusive son, who hid his masterpieces, just like I have it in the book, in a food pantry and even in his stove, layered like lasagna. We're talking the caliber of Picasso, Chagall, Cézanne, and Matisse. When I first read this expose, again, I stopped in my tracks. Chills rose along my arms, and I knew once again I had my story. What if I thought my unscrupulous art dealer in my book would discover this treasure trove, Is it a crime to rob the robber? And one of my most prominent themes in writing historical World War II fiction is this: what is the fine line between the pursuit of justice versus the hunt for revenge? All my characters will traverse this theme, this fine line. Writing the wrongs of history, that's what I'm about as a woman and as an author. It's all about fighting, seeking the truth, and not giving up. We have all had our personal fights for ourselves and for those we love. My personal fight was for my kids. In 2002, my ex-husband disappeared. Literally, we've never seen him since. He abandoned me and my two daughters, who were then 5 and 3, took all of our money and left me with 67 cents in the bank. I still have that receipt. I had to fight. I had to survive, and I still had to be fun mommy while I was going through hell. But I never stopped believing in love or gave up on hope. Because when you are going through your own darkest moments, I always say, focus on the silver linings, the wonderful, perhaps miraculous things that come out of hardship, pain, and difficult times. When I was at ground zero, my husband now of 18 years, David Barr, walked into my life and into my heart. He later adopted my two daughters. So yes, if you read the dedication in the book, I'm the mom with the two Mayas, my Maya, his Maya, and my Noah. So in the wake of my world, which had fallen apart back then, new roots were growing. I had come back to life, better, greener, happier, smarter, stronger, and yes, empowered. That turbulent time in my own life was the emotional basis for my second novel, The Unbreakables, where my protagonist, Sophie Bloom, a Chicago mom and a sculptor, loses everything and flees to the south of France to rediscover her joie de vivre, a lust for life, love, sex, and of course, art. Perhaps you're seeing a pattern here. Every book I write has art in the background. Every book I write has a story that is a fight to the finish line. Empowered women, characters who follow their passion no matter what, twists and turns, mistakes and corrections. But in every story, I like to say, I leave my reader with hope. And so I'm at it again. Every time I think I'm going to leave World War II, I'm sucked back in. This past week, I finished a strong draft of my new novel called The Goddess of Warsaw, which is coming out in 2024, about a legendary Hollywood actress, a femme fatale with a dark secret past during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Once again, the pursuit of justice versus the hunt for revenge. So speaking of actresses and screen goddesses, I wanted to conclude with one fun story. It was October 2021, and I decided I wanted to send Woman on Fire to one celebrity, and I chose Sharon Stone, the original Woman on Fire back in my day. I thought, why not? Let's see what happens. So I sent her a copy of my book, which really wasn't a book yet. It was an advanced reader's copy, which is kind of the pre-book. And so about 3 weeks later, a month later, I was sitting on my couch with my husband watching Netflix like everyone else. And all of a sudden I get a text and it says, "Hi, it's Sharon Stone. I'm in Dubai and I'm reading your book and I'm loving it. Has anyone optioned it?" And let's just say you could hear my scream from Chicago to New Jersey. And so long story short, 6 weeks later, we signed a deal, and Sharon Stone is now set to produce and star in the film adaptation of Woman on Fire. So together, our goal is to showcase the incredible journey of one powerful painting as it moves through hands, hearts, and history. So I want to thank you for this beautiful, meaningful honor of having me here today to commemorate Holocaust Remembrance Day. I will strive to make it my life's work to never forget and to always stand up. Thank you for being here tonight, listening to my story, and most of all, thank you for your love of books. And as they say in my world, now that we're going to get to the question and answer part, I'm an open book and you can ask me anything. And again, thank you.
Thank you so, so much. That was truly riveting. You are such a wonderful storyteller, and I so enjoyed hearing everything. And I know everyone on here did as well. I'm going to put a reminder that you can put questions in the chat. I will be taking them, but I'm going to start us off with a few questions as I look in the chat. You said you were an open book, so
Ask me anything.
great. Okay. So one of the things that we strive to do at Federation in the Holocaust education world right now is have second, third, even fourth generations sharing and telling their grandparents' stories. And obviously you started by sharing with us that you are the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor. Can you share a little bit more about that? And is that something you might delve into, writing that story, or do you want to stick to fiction only, or have you thought about it before?
So actually, my dad is a Holocaust survivor. So he came on the boat at 13. He came here at 13. But my grandmother, of everyone in my family, is, as I mentioned, my mentor and my person. And she's actually the inspiration for a character in the book that you'll meet, Lillian Dassel, who's in the book. So it's a funny, I don't know if the word is funny, but in my family, we talked about it. It wasn't like it was a shut down story and no one talked about it and it was there lurking in the background. It was there. We knew. And, it was that strange thing. I grew up in suburbia and my dad had an accent. He, came from nothing, and rose to become a prominent ophthalmologist, but he had a very still deep accent. And so I was always very much aware of, although I was like everybody else, I really wasn't. And so that story was in the background of my life growing up at all times. And so I always, whether it was in college and, various organizations, pro-Israel organizations, that I've always done something to stand up and, really from the time I was very young. So it had, as you were asking, a very strong impact on my life.
Thank you. Of course, we know a lot of people that would say that, and we're grateful that it did shape you to writing this. We have a question coming in that says, who is going to paint the painting of Woman on Fire for the movie?
That's a great, I can't really discuss the ins and outs and the details of the movie, but I don't know. We'll see. The painting, just to mention, is an expressionist work of art. That was in my mind because, as I mentioned in my talk, the expressionists were the most persecuted. Hitler went after the expressionists with a vengeance never seen before. And mostly, as I mentioned, because it was a homegrown movement of art, but it was also, expressionism is how a work of art makes you feel. It's not, in expressionist art, it's crazy, fervent, wild brushstrokes. People can be pink, skies can be purple. You can't look at an expressionist work of art without having some very strong reaction. So that it was very important to me, in my mind at least, that Woman on Fire is an expressionist work of art.
It's clear that you use your life's passions and your sensitivities and all that you are in your work. Does Jules's mom reflect your own mother or possibly your grandmother, depending on the relationship at all in this?
It's funny. Jules' mom does not reflect my mother. This is going to sound a little strange, but I think, I was a single mom for a period of time when my ex-husband disappeared, as I mentioned, and I have to say, being a single mom is the hardest job in the world. And so I wanted to showcase sort of the strength and what Jules, Jules his mother is very strong, and she's a professional, and I really drew from my own experience when I created Jules's mother.
That's clearly evident that in your writing, you certainly put yourself into it. In Woman on Fire, what was your reasoning for having the main villain have Jewish blood?
Well, she was half Jewish, and her grandfather I'm not going to give away any spoilers in case people haven't read the book, but her grandfather was a very prominent art dealer who was Jewish in Paris at the time. And so there were lots of art dealers that were quite crooked back then and even now. So while creating this very unscrupulous art dealer, the one thing, I always find when creating a very dark, evil character is that no evil character, or the best evil characters, are the ones that are not totally evil. So Margot de Laurent, in my book, the art dealer, her soft spot, the tender part of her, was her connection to getting this painting back, which was to her grandfather. So for me, I wanted to showcase maybe some of the conflict that might be inside of her because of this. And so, she was half Jewish.
Right. So, look, we do know there are so many stories of all of that happened. There are so many people that had different sides. And so it's
Yes.
important to show those sides of the conflict. When I opened, I talked about, as a historian, that historical fiction sometimes you grapple with it, because, and you're a journalist too, so you have both sides in you. Where do you go to look for research? How do you make sure that everything is legitimate and everything is, or as we'd say, kosher, that we're making sure that what we're doing is right? Because we don't want to put out anything that really wouldn't have happened in that sense to add to Holocaust deniers and so forth. So where do you go for that research?
So first of all, that's an excellent point. And especially writing the Holocaust, you can't get it wrong. There's going to be always someone out there who would say, hey, my grandmother, my mother, I was there. That didn't happen that way. So just to give you an idea of my research ethic when it comes to this, for my first book, Woman on Fugitive Colors, I researched for 4 years, traveling to Europe, doing extensive interviews before I would allow myself pen to paper. So I sort of became a quasi expert in stolen art, that by the time I got to Woman on Fire, I had an excellent base. I research, I say because I'm a journalist, it's a little bit of a blessing and a curse. A blessing because I know how to research. I know how to unfold and peel away the artichoke layers to get to the story or the sources. But like a lot of my friends who write historical fiction, they might have 5 sources and call it a fact or call it a day. I need 20 in order to say yes, and it's on repeat, and to say, yes, this is fact, I'm good, this is going inside. So I am very meticulous on how I research my novels, especially, because it has the Holocaust in the background, especially being a survivor, a daughter of a survivor. It's essential that research is impeccable. And for example, my first book, I sent it to the US Holocaust Museum and had them vet it to make sure everything was kosher.
Right. I was going to ask that. Do you get them vetted, or do you look to historians to make sure that they are vetted and things like that? Yes.
For the first one, yes. The second one, no.
Okay. Another question coming in about your writing process. Do you feel that the story unfolds and writes as you lead as it goes, or do you map it out first and then put everything in, or is it some kind of combination?
So it's a little of a hybrid. I'm a little bit of a mad professor in a way. So if you go to my Instagram, and I'm very open, and I love when people come and see what I'm doing. You see my process, Lisa Barr 18, if you want, hi 18, easy. So what I do is I do all my research. And if you came to my house, you would see for about a 2-week period, my kitchen table that with the leaves pulled out, seating 14, every inch of that table has note cards and sticky notes, very much like Jules, in Woman on Fire. Then you move on into my dining room, leaves pulled out. Every inch of it is covered with note cards and timelines and everything. And so I really soak it in and absorb it. Then I push it all aside. I sit down at my computer and I start to write. And then the characters lead me in different directions. And I go back and consult with my note cards just to make sure that my timeline and historically is correct. But I really let the characters write the book itself. I mean, so it's in my head, but it's also I imbibe the characters and then I go.
Great. When is the movie scheduled to be released?
So it's slow right now. The outline has been done for the script, and it's sort of in the process. And it's really Sharon's wheelhouse. I mean, she's, putting everything together, the script, the actors, the directors, the studio, and I'm serving as sort of a consultant to that.
Well, that is certainly very exciting. And then a follow-up to that, you talked a little bit about your new book. Can you share a little bit more about what's to come? I know it's in early stages, and when the release of that is.
So it's slated for 2024. I just got an extension on my deadline because I've had, a crazy book tour schedule, and I needed a little bit more time. But yesterday, actually 2 days ago, I just finished a very, strong first draft. And, as I mentioned, it's World War II, and it's, I always veer towards something artsy. And this one is with an actress, and think old Hollywood femme fatale. And she was actually an assassin back in her real life that no one knows. And her past is going to come and haunt her. And so it's going to just blow up. And it's been really interesting to dig into this one.
That sounds fascinating. We'll be excited to read it, and certainly excited to welcome you back to Greater Metro West. Another question coming in about the future. Do you see Jules having like more adventures and continuing with her character, or you think this was kind of it?
No, I actually, it's funny. I thought about that, and I was thinking about doing that right after this book. But, I don't know if you know this, an author is kind of in the middle of three things. He or she or them, they're on book tour, and you're working on your next novel. And, so I had to have the story going at the same time as I'm on tour with this book. So I was inspired by a few things, and I decided, you know what, I'm going with this. And my publishing house loved it, so I went with this new story. But yes, 100%, I'm very connected to Jules, and I'm gonna bring her back.
Well, that is exciting for all of us as well. And going on that I just kind of popped into me during this. I have been following you for a while now because we decided to do this quite some time ago, which is wonderful, and so glad it came to fruition. But I see you're all over the place in your book tour, which is great. Do you find that most are Jewish connected groups, or most are not, or kind of a mix? And I'd be curious to hear a little bit about that, since the book really doesn't have a strong Jewish connotation to it, even though it's Holocaust, takes place during the Holocaust and World War II. Do you feel that there's a connection?
So I have a lot of book gigs that are Jewish organizations or with the Jewish Book Council, but I also have a lot that are not. And I really really love those, because I feel, a lot of the Jewish based book events, there's a really strong knowledge, but those that are not, I feel like I'm going in there and they're really learning things, and they're really walking away with a lot of knowledge about stolen art, the Holocaust. I mean, I do like to insert, facts that even a lot of Jewish groups that I've encountered did not know. For example, Hugo Boss the designer, designed all the uniforms for the Nazis, and he was a rabid anti-Semite. The company later apologized for their Nazi past, but inserting that, those are always very interesting tidbits or research-oriented facts that I like to stick in. So I think it's been a real combination of both. As you know, stolen art is a very hot topic, that transcends, everybody, and everyone is very interested in all of these paintings. So it's all groups, different groups, and book clubs, and events, a lot that are non-Jewish as well, and that are I find very interesting to do.
That's great. We're thrilled to hear that, and glad you're continuing with that. Speaking of, we touched again on the stolen art and how it's a hot topic right now. I mean, this is almost 80 years later. Why now? Why do you think, or what in your experience and all the research and all the reporting you've done on this and the books you've written, why is this such a big topic now?
Well, the reason is actually a little bit sensitive. So when you had people who were coming, years ago discussing the assets, and many people felt, how could you discuss the assets when we're talking about lives, 6 million dead, lives. And so there were so many things that were taken. And now, especially, as I had mentioned, with many of, most of the Holocaust survivors, the youngest Holocaust survivors are in their 80s. Okay. So what you have left are the assets. And it's not just assets, the way I look at it. It's about having crushed an entire culture, stripping someone's culture and taking it away from them, stealing their art, stealing their candlesticks, stealing their furniture, all these various assets that are our memories, And so this is what it's about. It's not just assets. It's about an entire life that was stolen, quashed, looted, and destroyed. And so what we know, the heirs of all these, victims, they're coming back and saying, hey, that, Matisse that's in this treasure trove, which is exactly what happened to a friend of mine whose $30 million Matisse was in this treasure trove that I was talking about in his stove. And it took her 9 years to get that painting back that belonged to her family, but she did. It matters. It really matters. So you have the grandchildren, and as I mentioned, now the great-grandchildren going after the assets that once belonged to their families and it was taken from them. And they have a leg to stand on in court. And more of these court cases that are working in their favor, it's opening up, a lot of avenues for people to reclaim their stolen art.
All right. No, that is fascinating. And when we talk about, which we touched on, when we talk about grandchildren and great-grandchildren, even now sharing these stories and telling them this is a part of their story and their fabric. And
Exactly.
so absolutely. It says you are yourself an artist. Are you an art collector, or do you do art? Is there a reason you focused on art as opposed to music or something like that? Was there something in your background that made you pick that?
I always say that in my last life, I was in Paris in the 1920s, hanging out with, Simone de Beauvoir, Sartre, and Picasso, that whole group. I don't know why. I'm so magnetized to that period of time. But no, I'm not an artist. Actually, my middle daughter is an artist. She's at the Art Institute of Chicago right now. But I am not. I have art. I love art. I collect, and I'm fascinated. And I think I veer toward it because what most interests me is the question, how far would you go for your passion? And so I feel as if artists are probably among the most passionate of all of us. And so I think that's why I really gravitate toward artists, and yeah.
That's great. We're going to take 2 more questions that I see coming in. But first of all, just who are some of your favorite authors, and do you like to read World War II fiction or nonfiction also? Or do you kind of just write about it and deviate a little bit?
No, I read a lot of World War II. I mean, Kristen Harmel is a good friend of mine. I mean, I've
We had her.
yeah, yeah, I love her. She's amazing. But
She was great. She was really great. We had her,
yeah,
I don't know, Jamie
she's a
will remember,
beautiful
about a year and a
person.
half ago.
Yeah. I read Daniel Silva. I love suspense. I love smut. I love romance. I love it all. If it's good, if I'm in knee deep research, I pretty much read the opposite of what I'm working on all day because I need a break, and so I might, whatever it is. I usually don't single out a lot of authors because I have a lot of author friends and I promote them all the time. So instead, if you're okay with it, I'll tell you what's permanently on my nightstand that never leaves. All right. So I always say my writing mentor is Nancy Drew. Those books, I had all 56 original vintage copies, and Nancy Drew taught me the beauty of mystery and suspense. I was the girl under my covers with the flashlight, lights were out, and I was reading Nancy Drew until the middle of the night. The Diary of Anne Frank is on my nightstand. Erica Jong, Fear of Flying, and Essie Hinton's The Outsiders. Those are books that kind of travel with me wherever I go and wherever I move, and they have a permanent spot.
That is great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And finally, our last question: how do the descendants go about discovering their ancestors' art and what was stolen and fighting back to get them? Have you delved
Well,
into that at all?
there's an art registry. You can contact, for me, there's the Illinois Holocaust Museum. There's a lot of different places that you can go and start to research. If you feel that your painting may have been stolen, or you feel that there may have been artwork in your family, if you want to contact me privately, I can give you a whole list of things that you can do to start to explore. I'd be happy to do that. But there are, if you do feel, or there is something in your family, or you sense there was something in the history, there are ways to access sources who can help you.
That is great. And if people need to reach out, where to reach myself and Jamie, and we're happy to help you with that and figure out how to get in touch with Lisa or how to point you in the right direction, because we know we have a lot of people on here tonight, and there may be people that are looking for that themselves. Lisa, we can't thank you enough for being here today. This is such an important week commemorating International Holocaust Remembrance Day on Friday, and we were honored to hear from you, hear your background, your story, and share a little bit of yourself with us. We thank you, and we look forward when the film comes out and your next book comes out. We look forward to welcoming you again, maybe in person, in Greater Metro West. I now want to introduce the Holocaust Council Chair, Susie Brush, to close out our program. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Elise. Lisa, thank you for your wonderful presentation. It was fantastic, and we truly enjoyed hearing from you. Although Lisa's book is historical fiction, we know that art theft by the Nazis during the Holocaust was rampant and has become a really important and thought-provoking topic. I'm thrilled that we could bring this issue in this way to our community tonight. We thank all of you for joining us and look forward to seeing you at future programming. Please especially look for upcoming centennial events, including our cookbook celebrating 100 years of our federation. Have a great night. Thanks again, everybody.